Welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors February Salon with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
You got it all in there. Well done.
Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful. And tonight we are talking about the Authors Guild survey. So the US Authors Guild survey on author income. That is what our theme is going to be this evening, because both Orna and I have a few opinions on that.
So unlike us.
So very unlike us indeed. So, and we're aiming to make our opinions useful for you all as ever. So first of all, as we always do, we are writers too, and we always like to make sure that we are giving you an update on the Alliance, but also on where we are in our own writing journey. So Orna, do you want to start by telling us any updates from the ALLi side?
Yes, ALLi is having a busy January, as it always does. We're on the lead up into London Book Fair, so getting ready for all of that. We will have a presence there again. This year we'll have a booth again and some sessions in Author HQ, and lots of allies heading to London from all over the world, really. And we will also be doing a new experiment around rights. Every year we try to get this whole thing about indie author rights right, and haven't quite cracked it yet, but trying a new approach this time. We've also been doing a lot of work around copyright and this whole idea of the new author and their needs being very different to the traditional view of the author who, you know, needs grants to kind of keep them going. That actually what authors need most now is mindset training and business training, and we've been reaching out to various governments around the world on that. We made a submission to the UK all-party committee on writers' income before Christmas, and now have been invited to submit to the New Zealand copyright review, which is we have to get the submission in by April. So lots going on at that sort of level. And we're also making some changes to this very podcast. So keep an eye on the podcast page, people. We're going to be adding a writing session, which is new, and also doing a whole stream on inspirational indie authors and all the very different things that all our members are doing, and just making everybody more both outside of ALLi, but also within ALLi, you know, more aware of what's going on and what they're doing. Speaking of people who are doing amazing things, why don't you tell us what you're doing?
Well, it's so funny because I was away in December, and you know, I'm always a bit down in December. I'm, you know, with the seasons, December's not good for me, but January is hell of a good. So, you know, I came back and I've just been super productive. So I talked last time that I've been having voice coaching for narrating my fiction, and I've really turned a corner on that. I just today have uploaded 1,000 Fiendish Angels, my three short stories. So it's 90 minutes with different characters, and I've been having actor kind of training. So what I've really learned, I've learned so much about writing because I've actually re-edited. Oh, and in fact, I have it in hardback, because we've talked about hardbacks before. Ooh. You can even do short stories in hardback. That's what's so awesome, and it feels so good.
How many pages there? How many pages?
It's about 60. About 60 pages. Nice. Yeah, it's not that. And this is just the normal size. It's not large print. I am doing large print as well. But basically, what's so fascinating, if people are interested, is it is an interpretation of my own work, which is kind of crazy. Like when you work with a narrator, they are interpreting, but it's I've never been that good, I think, at building in my secondary characters. But when you have to give a character a voice, you actually have to give them a voice. You have to think a lot about where they're coming from. So I feel that my writing is both better from a speaking point, but also in the characterization, I've deepened a lot in this edit. So I wrote those in 2013, 2014. So this is a new version for 2019 with the audio. So it will be about 3 weeks before that's out. But I feel like I've come on a long way. It's been a huge investment. Obviously, I've had one-on-one coaching, voice coaching, but I think I've always been so scared of my fiction, of reading my fiction aloud, of performing my fiction. It's felt very intimidating, and I feel like I've turned a corner. So that's been like magic, really super magical.
Wow. Good for you. Amazing. And I'm really interested in that idea of when you do it yourself, you're not just putting out another format. You're actually, it's almost like a new art form experience for you. It's like you're doing something else creatively completely different.
And that's exactly the point that I've discovered after, and I went through a lot of mindset stuff. And you and I have both been on this journey. Like 4 years ago, I think we would have done this, and we both said we'd never do audiobook stuff. And now here I am. But it's so interesting because I feel like my mindset shift has happened, and this feels more like the print format. You know, this is no different to the ebook. It's just a format, but I don't feel like my own audio narration is another format. It is an artifact of its own. And I am going to do one more short story, and then I'm going to tackle a full novel. I'm going to do Map of Shadows, which is my dark fantasy, and I'm just about to start writing the next one. So I think narrating the first one is going to help me do the second one. So I know this is a big deal for people, and absolutely it's not for most authors at all, but I certainly never thought I would do this, and I'm loving it. So that's been a real surprise.
Well, that's the key, isn't it? I mean, that's how you know you're on the right track. And, you know, if one author wants to do it, there are thousands of authors who are going to want to do it, you know. So as usual, you are there blazing the trail.
not quite. There are lots of people who do it. But the other thing that happened is, and you know, I've talked about this for many years as well, is saying that 2019 would be my year of no speaking. And I've also had a real sort of turn the corner on productivity. I feel like my calendar feels like my own. And so I just feel deliriously excited about this, which is kind of crazy. But I think and I've been reading a lot about when you say yes to things that are good, and then you miss out on the things that might be the best for you. Like opening up space for this audiobook narration feels like the right thing, because we're all about IP, we're all about intellectual property. And this is now not just an artistic artifact, it's another IP, property that I have that I'm going to hopefully make money on for the rest of my life and 70 years after I die. So that's just so exciting. So anyway, you can tell I'm giddy with January and creating stuff.
It's great. And I can't think of that many authors who read their own fiction. Lots who do their own nonfiction, but not so many, you know, often people who have a background in acting or something, but to actually go off there, call yourself an introvert, and then go off and come back on narrating your own fiction. Come on, nothing's more terrifying except stand-up comedy than narrating your own fiction or poetry, I think, personally. Yeah.
This is the beginning of the journey. So, and I hope for everyone listening, I think the part of this point is that I'm pushing myself into an area where I have been really scared. And many people think that, you know, we both seem pretty confident with how we do stuff, but every time you tackle a new thing, you are coming up against fear of my fear of judgment is right up there, because I know that I'm going to get comments saying I'm not very good. It will inevitably happen. Like we get 1-star reviews, that will happen. But equally, I just feel that you have to face that and do what you want to do. So you've also been doing some new things, haven't you? So tell us what you've been up to.
I will never narrate my fiction, but I have enjoyed, I'm putting together my first audiobook of poetry. So there's a lot of doing and redoing. So I thought I was finished, but I'm not. And some of it was tech and some of it was just when I heard them, you know, more needed revising. But yeah, it's enjoyable. I definitely don't love it enough, certainly at this point in time, to even contemplate doing fiction, but I would do non-fiction possibly again, except it's very time consuming. So poetry is just perfect for me. Also, I'm just really in love with the poetry community, which is a new discovery for me, even though I've been writing poems forever and I started publishing poems. It was my first self-published book was a pamphlet of poetry. But I didn't really go there. I just quietly did them and kind of put them out, and was so astonished that anybody bought them at all that I didn't even, I had an unexamined assumption about marketing poetry. I just assumed they, you know, I was doing very well to be selling any, and that was it. So as you know, as I've spoken about before on this show, about, I suppose it must be nearly 6 months ago now, I decided what would happen if I actually treated poetry just like everything else. So went back in there, redid all the books, put in back matter, you know, set up links, all the stuff. And the takeaway from that for everybody, I think, is every book, all of this has now become the basics for every book. So if you don't have those kinds of things set up where you have a tidy link for each title and the front or back matter leads on to the next thing that you want your reader to do, and you're inviting them to leave a review, and, you know, all that kind of best practice stuff, which you can find on your site or on the ALLi site. These are now the basics. These are not going to actually see you selling lots and lots of books, but without them, you kind of have nowhere to go. And that applies for every single book. So I'm just saying that for anybody else who might have an unexamined assumption about their books and what is necessary there. So the email list remains, I think, and I think you would agree, the central bedrock of all our lives, and our websites need to be the heart of what we are doing ourselves. And, you know, still see so many authors where the website is not doing the work it should do, and the books are not doing the work they should do. And mea culpa, mine weren't, my poetry books weren't. So it feels great to have them there, and just, you know, just by doing that, that has made a difference. But then you find that actually poetry is a little bit different in how it is consumed and how it is thought about and so on. So I've started an online open mic for poets, where we will read and share our poetry, but also talk about money, because poets don't, you know, and there's that whole polarization. So it's called The Prosperous Poet, and it will be a mix of poetry and talking about how one publishes poetry for profit. So
I am okay. I know you're not thinking about more non-fiction, but it's a hell of a title, The Prosperous Poet.
Yeah, well,
so much that is so controversial.
Eventually, if I reach, I'm doing it through my Patreon page. So if I reach the goal, the financial goal that's there, I have, one of the things I've said that I will do is put a non-fiction book together from the learning that will happen. So I don't expect it to happen overnight. But a nice slow build of a nice poetry community. So if any of the ALLis are listening, I found out that loads of you write poetry that I never even knew wrote poetry. So do reach out, and let's see if we can create this nice community where we will actually think about poetry and how it is consumed and put out there in a different sort of way. So yeah, that's me at the moment.
That's really, and I mean, of course, in the last week or so, Mary Oliver died, and one beloved poet, and certainly I've been reading her work, and lots of people have, try getting one of her books at the moment. They're all like sold out, and but it really made me think also about our body of work and what we do in our lifetime, and how her death is not a tragedy. She was, of a decent age, and but what she leaves behind is just incredible. And may we all create a body of work so that when we pop off, we'll be like, proud of everything. So I love that. I love the unexamined assumptions, everyone. So we're challenging you this week also on unexamined assumptions as to, for example, me, definitely, Orna was the one who got me into print a couple of years ago. I was doing just normal paperback print on demand, and Orna's challenging me over Ingram eventually got me there. So now I've got blooming everything, and I've overtaken Orna on my print production. All my large prints and my hardbacks and my everything, my workbooks. And so, sometimes you just need to be challenged. So may we continue to challenge you. Right. Anything else? What else? No, I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we're good. I'm slowly doing the hardbacks too, and I think I would encourage everybody to investigate all the different formats. And even if you don't want to do them straight away, some of them are very easy. It's just very easy to do a hardback if you've already got a paperback, for example.
Oh yes, yeah. And actually, I should say, Vellum are soon to be releasing their in their next edition large print settings based on the campaign I have been waging. Thank you to all of you who emailed them. It's bumped up the queue, so that's coming. That will help people. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say on that is, remember, if you're like just starting out, then you don't have to do all this now. Both Orna and I have been doing this for a while, and we are now like again, the 1,000 Fiendish Angels. This is 5 years, 6 years old, and I've re-edited it, now done the print, now done the audio. So you can do all this later on. It doesn't all have to be done at the same time. So I think that's important too.
Very important. It can't be all done at the same time. And this is the advanced salon. We do have a beginner salon if all of this is sounding overwhelming. That's next week. So yeah, start slowly. I started with 10 poems in a little pamphlet. That's where it started, 8 years ago or whenever it was. So yeah.
Yes, okay. Good point. This is the advanced one. Let's get into the advanced stuff, which is the Authors Guild report. And we will, of course, link to this in the show notes. But if you just, at the moment, if you Google Authors Guild authors income report, then you can find that quite easily. So that's what we are talking about. Obviously we can't go into all the detail, you can read that, but we're going to start the sort of hyperbole of the whole thing is around basically people just can't make any money, it's just awful, and even things like crisis of epic proportions, full-time middle-list and literary writers on the verge of extinction. So Orna, I first want to get your remarks on should we all just give up and throw the dice?
No. No, definitely not. I think the first thing, every survey has, actually, just before I get on to this, there are lots of questions coming in about what we were talking about earlier. And just to say, I will answer the questions in the comments after the show, because we're kind of time tight and we want to get into this income stuff, but your questions will be answered. Yeah, crisis of epic proportions, especially for literary writers. And I think it's back to this thing. When I read this survey, I'm hugely interested, as we all are, in author income, obviously, and dedicate my working life really to trying to enable and empower authors to earn more and to know that that's what we deserve, just like anybody else. And that required the change of system that we have now. So what has happened here is, while the survey did include self-published authors, and for that credit is due, and they worked with people like Reedsy and others who are good in the indie space, the whole thing is embedded with unexamined assumptions about what is important in writing, what is important for writers, who's good, who's bad, and what the problem is. So the whole way of looking at writer's income, and we'll go through it now as we go through the different points that they raise, but the whole way of looking at how authors earn is, to my mind, well, it's completely different to the way you and I look at it. But also, to my mind, it is stuck in an old way that is over. And therefore, by looking at what's there and by giving the recommendations based on that very traditional view of how authors earn money, it's not really doing what it could have done. And the second thing I think that's worth saying is, we have a problem with surveys into author income, and Jane Friedman has a very good article which analyzes that. And you find it on janefriedman.com, author-income-surveys. She just talks about it. I'm not going to talk about it here because we don't have time, but she talks about the methodologies that are used and why they are deeply flawed, and why, in short, don't believe everything you read about falling author incomes and so on, because well, all of these statistics generally are always a proportion of people, and there's so many, again, and it seems to be the theme of the evening, unexamined assumptions embedded in how you ask questions and so on and so forth, and then what they're going to be used for. So yeah. What was your feeling overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think also that you know, going a little bit woo-woo, you get what you aim for, you get what your expectations are. And if you expect to not make any money as a writer, which, let's face it, most people who have not had education around what being a writer can mean, those all the things, you know, Dean Wesley Smith talks about it a lot, the sort of the sacred cows, the myths of writing, you know, those are the things that you have to educate yourself about, and you have to change your mindset around. And we talk a lot about mindset. So much of this, and I almost feel like, just the audiobook thing again, I feel like my own mindset was I could never do that. And I've said it, I could never narrate my own fiction like you did earlier. And yet by changing my attitude, by changing my mindset, and then taking action towards changing my behavior, then I was able to kind of overcome that fear and start investing in myself, in a new asset that is myself. And I think that that's my main issue with this report, is that it's reactive. And fair enough, like, you know, you can have a reactive report, but it doesn't offer what we are going to offer, which is how can you change your mindset so that when you see things like this, I see this and go, hell yeah, I'm going to just take this on. And, you know, I see it as a trumpet call. I think Sylvester Stallone, that's his quote, you know, when people rejected him in the early days, he saw it as a trumpet call to actually get on with it. And that's how I always feel about these things. It's sort of well, let's go do it anyway then. Like, don't tell me I can't do that, because I'm going to do that anyway. And you do have to have that kind of, that's an independent author attitude, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, empowering ourselves and helping each other to do that. The thing about this report is the way in which it completely polarizes the creative and the commercial. And that is a mindset that we see in a lot of authors. And it's one I understand, because I started off there many, many years ago. And, you know, I'm talking decades ago now, before getting into the business of publishing at all. But in my mind, again, in a non-examined way, they were poles apart, and almost, you know, by devoting yourself to poetry and, you know, the higher things, you were stepping away from commerce, and it made you feel superior or something, almost, you know, not quite. But there's that kind of thing going on here, where they're talking about literary fiction as if it is more important than other fiction, and assuming that that kind of writing, which is, you know, the kind of writing that the publishing industry itself likes to read, and obviously the kind of writing that, you know, lots of people write, but lots of people don't write. We cannot ever know what's important, which books are actually going to outlive their own time, or which are going to cross boundaries. We just write our stuff, whatever we're moved to write, and we put it out there. So the idea that literary writers are in some way more important than other writers is an assumption that I would really kind of question. And I would also question whether there is this actual crisis for literary writers that they're talking about. Yeah, so where to start?
Well, I think that's the first, and we're doing tips. The first tip is mindset shift. If you hear yourself saying things, then challenge that, and how can you change your mindset and your behavior in order to you know, prove that wrong, and you can. I think the second thing is the just going back to literary writers and writers in a wider sense, it says, you know, it seems to suggest that literary writers or other authors have always expected a full-time income, and that this is now a sudden shift. Whereas I believe the reality is that actually most, like 95%, I think it is, of writers have other forms of income, and that may be a day job, that may be teaching, and their suggestion that now you can't do it, I mean, seems to me to be slightly wrong, because everyone has always had to have different forms of income.
Yeah, more literary, in inverted commas, and experimentally, whereas a writer, the smaller your audience was. And you could actually argue now that with the globalization of the audience, of the readership, that a literary writer has more chance of making money from their books, because literary readers will pay more. And if you expand your readership beyond your own territory, beyond your own country, of course, you need to become a good publisher to do that. You need to know how to reach a reader. You need to know how to appeal to them. You need to know how to stand out in a very, very crowded market, because with both poetry and literary fiction, you've got more people nearly wanting to write them than to read them. And I think that's it's an interesting kind of shift. But there is, you've talked before about this self-sustaining ecosystem that we create, whereby we are both creators and consumers within our micro niche. And I think that is, you can see that really working in poetry now at the moment, which is having its moment. Literary fiction is on a bit of a dip at the moment. There are cycles in these things as well, which when you've lived as long as I have, you come to recognize and see that people are always going to want story. People are always going to want poetry. People are always going to want all kinds of writing, and that's not going to go away anytime. So it's up to each of us as an individual to find out what our offering is and to set it up in a way that it actually does work for us, and to put money and meaning there in the heart of what we do and how we do it. And I think that's something that an indie author can do in a way that is almost impossible if you only go through the traditional system.
And of course, you've written a great blog post on business models, and that was your talk at Digital Book World last year. And so we'll put those links in the notes as well, because I think that's the point. The point is, yeah, as you said, the old models are not working, which is why those figures are showing. But what's interesting for us, all of us, is the new models. Like, again, I'm just going to keep harping on about audiobooks, but even a couple of years ago, indies didn't even have access to publish with narrators or do royalty split deals, or we didn't have pre-orders a few years ago. Do you remember that? We weren't allowed to do pre-orders. We weren't allowed to do hardbacks with Ingram Spark. That's just awesome. There's so many things that keep opening up for us, opening up to indie authors, as the Alliance would say. But also, I just noted one of the news things. We forgot to do some news, but Wattpad just launched Wattpad books this week. So and the numbers on Wattpad are incredible, and there's no way that the publishing industry, would consider Wattpad a publisher up until now. I mean, they weren't officially a publisher, and yet they have like so many millions of active users every month globally, and they've now had over 1,000 books, TV deals, movie deals out of Wattpad. Now, what the hell is that form of writing? That's people on their phones. I think it's something like 70% of the users use mobile. So that's just incredible to me. And that is a new, they're experimenting with micropayments. They're experimenting with payment for advertising. So things like, that's just one example of a new model. You and I both using Patreon, for example. Wonderful author Shawnam Maguire, who I sponsor on Patreon. She puts out one short story a month. And I think now it's over 30 grand for her Patreon, and I love her books, and I'm happy to chuck in $1 or $2 for that, and that's really awesome. That's a short story. There is no way she'd be making that much on a short story, and she also keeps the rights, so she can also go publish that too. Plus, she's traditional and all kinds of things. So I want people to look at this and go, this is based on the old model. So what are the other things I can do in the new model to expand my IP into other ways?
Definitely. And that is what leaps out from this. There's also assumptions around self-publishing in the report, which I would question. Actually, they say that self-published authors earned less than traditionally published authors. Now, that's a sweeping statement, and it's not that easy to see exactly what was being said there. But I think, that implies that the traditional publishing model pays more and pays better, whereas I don't believe that is the case for the vast majority of authors. It definitely does for a tiny few. A tiny few get access to a global promotional setup through traditional TV and media. that, you know, most authors don't get. Most authors who are traditionally published don't get it, and obviously most indie authors are locked out of that. We haven't seen anybody really kind of take that on unless a movie has been made of the book, and then that opens those doors. But a straight indie book has not yet managed to just doesn't have that kind of investment, doesn't have the economies of scale. But I think it's very obvious why in a survey of all kinds of authors, you would have people who you would come up with the conclusion that self-published authors earn less, because a lot of these authors that were being surveyed have been writing and publishing for a very long time. But also, whereas most indies can only, by definition almost, have been publishing for under a decade. But also, it doesn't, you know, you're always going to have a non-curated thing in self-publishing. So you're always going to have within self-publishing books that are not properly published, either in terms of their design or their editorial or their marketing or their promotion. The publishing job hasn't been done properly, and therefore they're not going to sell. So it doesn't mean that those people who are putting out the equivalent product, which is what we're always talking about, and bring it to their readers, are earning less. I would argue, if everything else is like for like, if the editorial, the design, and the promotion and the marketing are equivalent, the self-published book will earn more for its author, hands down.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I also think a lot of indie authors don't necessarily publish to make money, whereas if you are traditionally published, then, as you say, you've been curated in some way. And certainly up until quite recently, I think it will be interesting to see whether things change in the next couple of years with these type of figures, because of course there's a lot of authors now who are taking zero advance digital only deals with publishers, and I think that's going to really change. I think with the change in Amazon, we talked last time about the kind of pay to play, Amazon advertising, the change in algorithms, that type of thing, so that you really do have to be putting more money into marketing. The sort of throw 100 digital books at a wall and make some money from some of them won't work anymore for traditional publishers in the same way it won't work for individual authors. So it is really interesting. But again, it doesn't matter. Like, I always feel like with these, it doesn't matter. Like, we're not being average. We're not, the ALLi membership is not average. We are amazing.
So true.
Yeah. But I mean, as in, people who join the Alliance are usually committed to the process of becoming a better writer, but also better publisher, better marketer, better business person, and committed to excellence, which is among our values. And so I feel like there's and there's a growth curve. We've talked about that before. You know, I look at my first book in that first year and kind of go, oh dear, what was I thinking? You know, why didn't I do all of the things that we now know are true? But you go through your learning curve and you learn this. So, you know, again, we're just toddling. The indie movement is toddling along. Come see us when we're grey and old, and we'll still be talking about this stuff. Although we'll never be grey because we dye our hair. So.
That's a whole other podcast sometime.
But let's should we talk about Amazon, the Blame Amazon fun?
Yes, but just before we get into that, because that's kind of hilarious. The other thing I would like to say, that the bizarre kind of finding in the survey that just made no sense to me. Roughly 25% of all authors surveyed had earned $0 in book-related income in 2017. 18% of full-time authors had earned $0 in book-related income at the same time. And this was attributed by the survey to the decline in royalties and advance.
How are they full-time authors if they earn zero?
Well, that's my point. I mean, how can you be, especially when there is self-publishing? You know, okay, maybe you can be if you are only writing one book, you know, and it's taking you 4 years or something, and that's what you've devoted yourself to. But I can't imagine that a quarter of all writers are doing that. And even if you were doing that, couldn't you publish some short stories on the side and get some income for that? I just don't understand that at all. So yeah,
I think I do, because when I spoke I'm not going to name it, a particular event, and was with a membership which was very traditional, and when I talked about things like, oh, again, audio, if you haven't signed away your audio rights, why don't you get on and get your audiobook out there, you know, work with a narrator, and they were like, but I couldn't do that, you know, that's too much to learn. Or, you know, if you signed a contract over 10 years ago, chances are you didn't sign away your ebook rights, you didn't sign away your audio rights, so go exploit those. So I feel that the $0 thing, I mean, you could say, I mean, some people might be breaking even, so the publishing costs might, you know, offset with the self-publishing costs, for example. But I think, again, the point is, you see your own future. I mean, I get upset if my income dips even a little bit. I'm like watching this stuff, and then I go, okay, well, what can I do to bring it back up again? That's a kind of active management of your author career. But anyway, so let's come back to Amazon. So sorry, yeah.
And I was just going to add to what you're saying. Absolutely agree 100%. And also say to authors, make money your measure. You know, there are lots of ways you can measure your success. Money is a good way to measure, and too few authors use it, I think. And we use other ways of thinking about our success, Facebook likes, and, you know, we got a lot of attention or whatever for a particular thing. But actually, if you make money your measure, it's very grounding and very real and very useful. So yeah, I would take that as a takeaway from this quarter of writers who call themselves full-time authors and don't earn any money at all.
Yeah, and I still remember that first $10. I mean, the first $10 is special time, and my first $10 was from Amazon. So there's a nice segue into Amazon, because they say the Amazon factor plays a large role in the apocalypse, and Amazon owns 72% of the online retail book market. I thought this was interesting. This is in the USA, obviously, and nearly 50% of all new book units sold in the US, according to Amazon's annual reports. The growth of subscription programs, fiction sales moving to Amazon, and, quote, self-publishing is at the mercy of Amazon. And I'm like, what? Don't be silly, you know. But we talk about this a lot, obviously, multiple streams of income, and independence is not dependent on Amazon. But we can say all that, but it's still entirely true that most indie authors make most of their money from Amazon. So what are your thoughts on all those comments? Oh, actually, there was a Wall Street Journal as well with a great quote in the last week saying Amazon is not exploiting the system, Amazon is the system. It's a great article.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, one of the things is that Amazon's very visible, and without a doubt, it is the dominant player in the market. But
in the USA.
In the USA, without a doubt. That's what I was just going to say, in that one place, in that territory. And it is a very clever and good player, but it is not the only player, and it is not the only game in town. If the world is your town, which it can be in self-publishing, which it can't be in traditional publishing, but which it can be in self-publishing. So I think, for me, all of this comes back to what I find just rising up. You were talking about, you know, feeling like disobey. I don't agree with any of that. I'm going off to show that it's not true. I think I absolutely understand that rising up. And what I feel is that we play such a huge role in what self-publishing actually means. We are the ones who get to define that. We are the authors. We're a movement, and each of us has a part to play in how dominant Amazon is in the market, for example, and how many territories we are reaching, how many formats we're putting our books out in, all of that. I think that's really the most important thing for us to realize, so that if there is a dominant player in the marketplace and we are just, you know, going along with that because it's the dominant player, I better be there and I'm not going to bother with anything else, then we reinforce and we replicate that. But if we start thinking about our own business and put that at the heart of it, and if we start thinking about, you know, how do I make money? What's best for me? Okay, I can do this. I can sell books on Amazon. That's absolutely one way I can do it, but it's not the only way to do it. And once I've done that. What else can I do, or how else can I shape this? I think it's really key that we do that, and we share, and we are sharing all these different ways in which you can make an income. And I think that's the thing that we need to take away from this report more than anything. If people who are answering an author's survey on income are able to say, I earned 0%, we have to realize we're not writers if we're not writing, and we're not publishers if we're not publishing. You know, we've got to be doing the work of putting the stuff out there. That's where it begins. And that's what I was left with more than anything from this report, was that it just looks at things through the wrong end of the telescope in terms of advising authors, which is really, it's an important body with a lot of influence. And I think a lot of authors are going to go away from reading that survey feeling deflated and unnecessarily, you know, in fact may give up. Because there's a whole sort of, as you say, apocalyptic feel to it. It's not just stated, here are the facts, you know, here's what our survey found. There is an interpretation here and a use of language that is, I don't know what word.
Yeah, well, I think, and the point is, this environment that we're in, you get to choose whether it's what it is for you. I mean, you could say, oh, you know, there's no privacy, there's too much email, there's too much noise, there's too many people writing, there's too many books out there, there's, you know, I just can't do anything. Or you choose the future of, I'm going to use what the tools there are to create, and like both of us, you know, getting little audio studios in our houses and making the most of audio. I'm starting another podcast next month, which is just mad, but you know, the power of voice is only going to get more exciting. So embracing, and this actually, that's the other thing I was going to say, there is a fact, and the fact is that there are more forms of entertainment than ever. You know, Amazon Prime and Netflix and all the others doing their thing. People can do that. People can play games. People can read any one of all these hundreds of other things. But you don't let that put you off. We are writers. We write, and then what you do with that, you get to choose. You get to put it out there. You get to build your 1,000 true fans, and you don't need to be J.K. Rowling. You know, you can make a good living without anyone else even noticing.
Absolutely. Was it Written Word Media did a survey and found, and the exact percentage escapes me because it is a number and that's the way my brain works, but it is in our member magazine last issue. But there is a significant percentage of writers who are earning over six figures, so over 100,000, I think it was dollars US, who have never appeared on any bestseller list, and nobody has heard their name. But on they go just quietly. And we know this is one of the reasons that we want to do this inspirational indie thing. We know lots of people who are really, really happy, making a great living and life in writing in all sorts of different ways. And they don't figure in any surveys, and they don't figure in any research because they're under the radar. They're selling through special stores outlets or through their own websites, or, you know, they're turning up in an ISBN in one country, but that is in no way a measure of how they're actually doing. So, you know, pretty much anything you hear about this stuff, you can take with a grain of salt. And as Joanna said, you take from it what you want from it. What will be most creative thing for you to believe? Go believe that and act from there. And you might as well as believing these expensive surveys that actually don't certainly don't bring you any closer to the truth of what it is to be a writer today.
Yeah, so on that happy, productive, creative note, you get to choose your 2019. Orna, what are you getting up to in the next month?
So I'll be copper fastening the open mic, and I have 2 workbooks coming in hardback, paperback, and if Vellum obliges soon, large print. Yeah, and getting ready for London Book Fair and all that we're going to be doing there. Yeah.
Yeah, that is early this year. I will be at London Book Fair, and I will be on the ALLi stand along with some of the other volunteers over the couple of days. But I am starting my next novel on the 1st of February. I like to have a start date because it kind of fixes it in my mind. So I'll be starting the next Matt Walker dark fantasy, and also I'll be narrating another short story. I'll be having a whole load more audio on Wide. So I've gone wide with Find a Way. If you sign the exclusive deal, non-royalty share with ACX, once they've been there a year, you can take them out, so they don't have to be there for 7 years. So I'm taking mine out after the year, so I'm doing all of that, getting as much audio wide. Google Play, for example, you know, I did an interview recently on voice technologies and the in-home assistants, and the Google Assistant is on something like 9 billion devices, which is just crazy. So I'm like, yeah, I want to be there. So lots of things going on. And actually I have an interview coming up with Will from Find a Way. So very excited about that. But yeah, I'm going to be back on it in terms of first drafting. So the cycle continues.
Good luck with that. It sounds nice.
Yeah.
I would like to be there. I'm in editing heaven for a little while.
Yeah, fun editing. And that's another truth. We're always in the cycle somewhere. So hope that has helped everyone this evening. So we will be back next month at the end of February, I guess, for the March show. So yeah, thank you for listening, everyone, and happy writing. See you next time.
Happy publishing.
Happy publishing.
Bye-bye.